Hello, my name is Alyssa. I'm the host of Stories and Spoilers, the podcast, and I am so happy to introduce an amazing independent author who also does the art for her books. This is Brooklyn Quintana. So, Brooklyn, tell them more about you, the genre of your book, and just a non-spoiler description.
Yeah, so first off, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Definitely appreciate it. Like you said, my name's Brooklyn Quintana. I am the author of the Phineas Fogg series, which is an ongoing fantasy series. Books one and two are both out. Book three is coming, barring any unforeseen circumstances, later this year. And there will be nine of them. Book one is very action adventure, think Hunger Games kind of mixed with Jumanji with a bit of Harry Potter. And book two is for the hot topic kids out there who really like Pan's Labyrinth and horror movies. Is definitely more the
Ooh.
vibe of book two. And then book three, I can't even begin to describe what it would be about without spoiling anything.
Okay, tell me more about this Hunger Games Jumanji combination. What makes you describe your book that way, the first one?
So it follows the story of Prince Finn, who goes to a military academy. So he lives in Asteria, which is essentially kind of think the United Kingdom, a very, there's fog and rain and it's pretty kind of like Scotlandy. And then they send their royal children and the children of the aristocracy to a tropical archipelago. So like Hawaii, but there's monsters in the jungle. And
Hmm.
they go to the Morency Academy of Military Arts, which, as you said earlier, when we were talking, that you are a big Harry Potter fan. So this school makes Hogwarts look super safe. Their version of a headmaster is very forthwith with them, forthright, saying, I don't anticipate that all of you are going to survive, but let's see how far you make it kind of deal. And at the end of their first year, the first and second years, they compete together in an end of year games to see kind of which branch of the military they're going to be appointed to, where they're going to train the remaining years of school. So it is a week-long event where they traverse the entire archipelago and try to survive until they make it to the arena, where they have a gladiator style battle royale. Obviously, at the end, they're not trying to kill each other, because that would be counterproductive if you kill all of your classmates. It's more just to see who's the best of the best, who deserves to be in what military branch. They call them divisions, and proving yourself and proving all that you've learned that year.
Wow. I will say, looking for fantasy after being a Hunger Games fan, I love the Hunger Games. I love the books that she has coming out. There's a lot of darker themes and discussions. In your books, do you feel like there are certain lessons or things that you want your characters to experience and learn? And what do you want to tell readers about that?
Definitely. So, as a Hunger Games fan myself, I have heard people draw the parallels, and obviously with the kind of battle royale style Hunger Games-esque training session game at the end of the year, that's where that comparison is drawn. But I think there's a very big difference in that Katniss came from District 12 and it was poor and she was kind of the underdog. Whereas in Finn's case, he is a prince. He may not be the prince who's going to become king, but he is one of the princes. He's part of the royal family. The other kids are part of the nobility. So it's kind of the flip side of that, where they're proving themselves. They're proving why they should be the future leaders, why they're capable, why they should
Mm.
be trusted and in charge of, essentially the rest of the military and the kingdom.
What inspired this book for you?
There was an episode of The Crown in season one where Prince Philip talks about going to, I think it was called Gordonston, the academy he went to in Scotland. And they have a flashback of Prince Philip running through like this obstacle course and it's muddy and gross. And I thought, what a really cool concept to throw these very privileged, very coddled children kind of into a Spartan-like military academy in a jungle full of things that will kill them. And the academy really operates under the impetus of, we don't care what your last name is, you have to prove your own individual worth here. Like, they don't call them by any of their titles. Nobody calls him really Prince Phineas unless it's in a really formal setting. So it's, you're just Finn. And your cousin, who's also a prince, he doesn't get his title either. Nobody is a young lord unless they're being sarcastic. So it is very much prove your merit based on who you are, not who your family is kind of situation, that I really kind of fell in love with, maybe the spark or beginning of that, having watched that episode of The Crown.
That sounds absolutely amazing. You brought up the crown. I was curious. Within the monarchy, for folks who may be fans of history, a lot of the power is hereditary. Like the first son will kind of step into being a king depending on who he marries. She would step into being a queen. What are your thoughts on power and kind of that element in the monarchy? Do you feel like that's a kind of a key point that may come up in your other books, where it's like the concept of power and the way it manipulates?
It definitely does come up, maybe not so much in the manipulative, corruptive nature of power, but
Mm.
very much in that traditional aspect, male primogeniture, where that oldest son does become king. And it is brought up a lot that, you know, Phineas's oldest cousin, Kieran, who is the heir to the throne, the crown prince, he's like a really relaxed party guy who very, very clearly does not want to be the one who's in charge, who has these responsibilities. Whereas his younger brother, Holland, is more naturally adept at these kinds of things. He's a very strategic kid. He's a very, good work ethic. He's a natural leader. And so it is propositioned a lot of times like, okay, well, why wouldn't you just abdicate and let Holland do it? He's more suited to it. Whereas Kieran understands, maybe right now I'm not in the position and I don't have the personality to take over, but I understand that I have to. And I understand that my temperament is maybe more suited, not towards strategy, but even keeled nature. And then when it comes to Phineas, he's the third of the princes. So he's more of a, I just want to have fun, have a good time, have my friends, but I know that my job is to lead the military and is to bolster my other two cousins and is the one who has to lead. So everybody's kind of in a, I have to reconcile my natural state of being with my lot in life, because they operate on a very loyal basis. As much as, Holland may be jealous of his brother and Finn may not want the responsibility, they are not going to turn on each other. They're not going to backstab. So they have to kind of force themselves into those roles, where I think that's kind of where you get the tension with them, is fitting yourself into a mold that you don't naturally kind of work with and you don't fit in.
That is such a cool concept. I was also kind of curious, if your book became a film or it became a show, who would you cast as Phineas and why?
You'd have to do some time traveling. I think a young Asa Butterfield would have been the perfect
Ooh.
Finn. Aesthetically, he looks very, very similar with the black hair, pale skin, freckles. The only difference is Finn has gray eyes and Asa Butterfield obviously has blue, but he has that kind of facial features where he looks like gentle, but also kind of looks like he could mess you up. And that's very much Finn's whole thing.
You're one of the first authors who's had a very quick answer. A lot of the authors I've asked have been like, "Oh, I'm not really sure," and I'm like, "Just consider." And they're like, "Okay," and they end up telling me who they would cast. You were like, "Boom, this is the exact person I would think of."
Oh
Um,
yeah, 100%. I've been thinking of this for years. So like when I'm writing, that's kind of who I picture when Finn is in scenes, is a young Asa Butterfield.
that's really cool. Okay, I wanted to ask you a quick question. What are three words you would use to describe the first book in the series?
See, that's a harder question.
Mm-hmm.
Whimsical, brutal, fun.
Ooh, okay. I love your answers. I also was curious, what books got you into reading? And did those influence the way that you write now and kind of the way you develop your story?
That's more of a twofold question. So I wasn't a big reader as a kid,
Mm.
but I'm a 90s kid. So obviously I grew up with Harry Potter and my dad got the books and he would read them to me to kind of get me interested in reading. So that was very much my introduction into fantasy. Then obviously from there, like Lord of the Rings, Hunger Games, things like that. I surprisingly am not a big fantasy reader. I don't know. I think more so now that I'm an adult, it's to keep myself away from being influenced by other fantasy authors. And I think because of that, I read a lot of nonfiction, which is where I get a lot of my ideas from and draw a lot of
Mm.
historical allusions. And I'm a big fan of classic literature. So like Edgar Allan Poe, Ernest Hemingway. I like things like that, a little bit of Cormac McCarthy. So I think my writing style definitely stands out from current modern fantasy books because it's a lot more impacted by that older style of writing than it is by kind of the modern way to go about storytelling.
Hmm. I was curious as well. You compared your first book to Hunger Games meets Jumanji. What came up with that comparison? Those are two very different films.
I mean, so like I said, I liked the Hunger Games. I'm probably a bigger fan of Jumanji. Like I said, I'm a 90s kid. So that movie holds like a very special place in my heart. I wasn't actually the person who came up with it, though. It was on one of my Goodreads review, and I thought that is a poignant comparison I had not thought of. And I just fell in love with it. So now it's just kind of in my elevator pitch because it does immediately, people are like, oh, murder jungle, got it. Okay. So it's a good reference point for people.
Okay, I like that. And I also enjoy how you're comparing the environment that they have to survive in is almost like a weapon itself. So that's really interesting.
A hundred
Yeah.
percent. There's like literally a point where they drop these kids in the woods and they're like, hey, by the way, jungle may or may not be enchanted. Hope you make it out. So it's kind of like a keep your wits about you test of what you've learned. The jungle definitely is its own character in the story.
I love that. I was also curious because this is a fantasy, what how did you build this fantasy in this world? So if the jungle is enchanted in a way, why did you choose to go into a fantasy element with this story?
I mean, even though I don't particularly read a lot of fantasy, I still watch a lot of fantasy movies,
Hmm.
and I am very much impacted by that. I referenced Pan's Labyrinth earlier, and that has really been a big impact, I think, on the kinds of stories I like and my own personal narrative style. So I really like the element of nature is beautiful and has all these bright colors, and it is really enticing to want to, walk into the trees and get away from everything. But also, like, there's things in the trees that are definitely going to kill you, and there's shadows, and those colorful things could be poisonous, and the vines could come and
Mm.
get you and drag you in deeper, and you can't be heard screaming because the jungle's too thick. And I've always been a sucker for jungle horror. I don't know why. It's a very
Oh,
niche genre that I like in both book and film. So like Heart of Darkness, I think as a book qualifies as jungle horror to an extent. So maybe that's where my love of that began, and also like Lord of the Flies. So those things have very clearly influenced my love of this very niche topic.
I was gonna say, when I think jungle horror, I think Annihilation, where like this environment is its only kind of concept in nature is to survive and to spread. And it's this sentient kind of orb. You know when you like blow a bubble and you see all the colors
Mhm.
around the bubble? This orb spreads through us or like a one section of the earth and it begins to spread. And they send a group of women into this orb in order to try to kind of the government sends them in and they're all veterans, like, okay, you're gonna go in and try to destroy this place wherever this orb is growing from. And the women who all go in, they begin to realize that these women around them, they don't know each other. All of them have done bad things in their lives, so they all have reasons why maybe they don't want to be here any longer. So none of them, like, they're all kind of expendable. And you
Mhm.
begin to realize the horror of it is this creature, this entity that's spreading. It begins to emulate these women, and there's creatures and entities in the woods that are like a bear that screams like the sounds of its victims. You know what I mean?
Oh, that's cool.
It's
Okay.
crazy. Like it, but the book itself was a lot darker. The film was also quite amazing, but it has Natalie Portman in it, and she did a really, really good job. It also has Oscar Isaac. Her husband was one of the first people to go into this orb to destroy it, and he comes home and he's very different. Uh,
Okay, interesting. I'm gonna have to give this a watch. That sounds
it's
right up my alley.
very good. It's a very good horror. As almost like a, I would. It's a psychological it's very mental. So it's really, really good though. So yeah, I love that. And then have you ever seen The Ruins or if you've read The Ruins?
Oh, of course. Love that.
Also, the moment you said woods horror, I was like, oh, The Ruins, 100%. There was another book that was set, I think, in the equivalent of Peru. I don't remember the title, but I remember the cover. I have it somewhere. But it's this cave, and this group of this TV crew goes to this island, and there's a cave, and the very first chapter is like there's a hole in the cave, and when the moon comes in you see all the vines begin to move and you get to hear all the echoes of all the people who died in the cave. And
Okay, I love that.
it sounds amazing. I will find it
That
and send
sounds
it to you.
great.
But there's a little girl, and like I think she she speaks English to some extent, and the TV crew has heard rumors of this cave, so they come from the U.S. to this island in order to videotape the cave and try to say like this is not real. And the girl is like, she was like, I'll show you the way, but you have to show respect, and they don't. And it's really, really good. I will find the book and send
Ooh,
it to you.
interesting. Okay, yeah, that sounds like literally right up my alley. I love
I'm
that.
telling you, if you like, it's not really woods, it's definitely more tropical, but it's earth.
You said
So
cave, and that's my other weird niche interest is cave related movies.
ooh, like spelunking is my worst fear. I can't stand like small
Yeah,
spaces.
spelunking, what's it? 47 meters down
Yep.
uncaged, where they're in the tunnels in
No.
horrifying. The Descent,
The
horrifying.
Descent, yes.
Love it. Yeah, there if anybody has watched The Descent and they read my books, they're going to be like, okay, Brooklyn clearly loves cave horror because
Ooh.
there's a straight up reference to that movie in there.
I don't want to spoil it. The end of The Descent is one of the most iconic, like cinematic moments for horror, where you think you're okay and then it's like no, and it's so bleak and it's so scary. I can't. It's very, very spooky. So yes, I love that. So your book is fantasy, but it does have horror elements. Hunger Games itself to me is a horror film. It is inherently horrifying. But
Yeah.
everyone got distracted by PETA, so I was sitting here, I'm like, it's a horror, it's a horror, don't get distracted by his kind eyes. But
I mean,
yes.
yeah, 100%. If you objectively look at we're going to throw children into a death fight in the woods that we control, absolutely a horror movie.
Yes, and in the books, I believe they were younger. In the
Oh,
movie, they
100%.
aged them
Yeah, they
up.
were a lot younger. I think they aged them up because like the thought of, a 13, 14-year-old boy like stoving in somebody's head with a rock is just not something people want to hear.
Indeed, indeed. Also, I will say that in certain books, I think that if you read them later on in life, you begin to realize the mature content that maybe you didn't realize when you were younger. But I tried to read the Harry Potter books, and I just could not get into them. For some reason, I could not mesh well with her writing.
Hmm.
And now, of course, I'm not a huge fan. I'm not a huge fan of the author, but for some reason, the films for me were the first films I ever saw that got darker through each film, like not only in lighting but in tone, and the story got darker. It was my first introduction to like a darker fantasy. And when the horrors are rooted in something very real, like Voldemort being the human equivalent of pain and grief and suffering and just like manipulation, this like horrible, horrible character. But there was something about that where now when you read other books, you are able to appreciate a lot of the darker themes because sometimes there's a metaphor behind them. So I'm very, very excited. I don't want to give too much away to the listeners, but I think it's very cool that in your world that you've built in this book, that the woods are not just the woods, and that there's a purpose behind what these people are facing. And I think it's very cool, this concept of like royals having to almost earn their positions of power, and not necessarily just being handed down to them. I think that's very cool. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
very
mean, like
interesting.
it's definitely if you read a lot of fantasy books, like Game of Thrones, where they
Mm-hmm.
have like that noble medievally talk that sounds like very flowery. Okay, nobody in my book does that because it's more rugged nobility because they go
Awesome.
to this school and you're like, all right, anybody who made it to adulthood, had to go survive terrible Nightmare Island for 6 years. So they're not over here like, my lord, da da da. They're very just like, my lord, here's what we're doing. We're straight to the point. We don't, beat around the bush. It's a very direct
I love
way
that.
of speaking.
I know you mentioned before we started recording that you create the art for your book, and on your Instagram, listeners, please check out Brooklyn's Instagram. It is so cool. I will link it in the show notes below. All of the character art is so colorful and visceral and intense. When you're writing, do you see everything very clearly in your mind, the way the story is kind of going? I've always been curious about that.
Yeah, it's like a movie playing in my head. So my editor one time told me when she was reading a rough draft, I think it was of book two actually. And she had made a comment like, I noticed it in book one and I noticed it more in book two that your scene transitions are not like, okay, we just cut to a new scene. It's very much like, Finn will be at point A and he'll look up and notice a bird, and then you'll follow the bird over the landscape, and then the bird
Mm.
will dip down, and here's now where the next scene goes. It's kind of that very cinematic. I wanted to be a director for film for a very long period of my life. And I've always been very interested in film, if everything I have said so far did not give that away. So I like those transitions where instead of just like, those asterisks and now we have a new scene, it's a creative way of cohesively going from scene to scene that also lends to the environment. So like if you follow that bird from where Finn is to the next point, you also now get to see the landscape beyond from where Phineas is. So you get to see like, okay, here's an ocean. The ocean is stormy, which means there's a storm over here that maybe isn't impacting Finn's character over here, but it's impacting the wider world because the world doesn't just exist in Finn's immediate vicinity. He is part of the world. He is not the world. So I think kind of that way of writing is more fun for me. So it is a very visual process because it would be like, okay, well, if the bird is flying, what would you see? You would see clouds. What color are the clouds because of the weather? How is the weather impacting the story from over here? So I think when I'm writing, that's kind of what's going on in my head.
That is so cool. Since you said that you wanted to go into film and possibly be a director, and it's never too late. You could do it. I was curious if, once again, I'm going to circle back because I love a book to film adaptation. If your book became a film, it's a good follow up question. Who would you want to direct the first film?
Oh, what a toss up. It's an entirely 50-50 split between Guillermo del Toro and Tim Burton.
Ooh, those are
Just
interesting
two
decisions.
very, very different people I recognize, but they both love that gothic aesthetic, which my story very, very clearly lends itself to. I'm a big fan of both of their work for my whole life, essentially. So it'd be between those two.
Cool.
I'd probably lean towards Guillermo del Toro, though.
Did you see his show on Netflix? It was like a little house, and he would open it, and each episode would be a different horror story.
No, I didn't even know this was
Yes.
a thing. See, if I wasn't working all the time, I could go ahead and watch these Netflix shows. I need to
Yes.
be more involved.
Yes. I believe he wanted, each episode is almost like a novella, and it has different cast members, different stories. They are not interconnected. And I believe it's still on Netflix. But it was like he would open this little house, and every episode he would come out and like tell you, like he'd pick an item out of the house, and that would tie to the story. And I was like, that was so cool and so creative. If he wrote a book, I would not be surprised. But he did a TV show, and it was called The Cabinet of Curiosities.
Oh, that does sound familiar. Yeah, I know. I have to add that to the list. That
It
sounds
was good.
perfect.
It was really, really good. He did an episode with the guy who played Prince Caspian, Ben Barnes.
Oh, okay.
It was
That's
so
okay.
creatively done. I think that he's like the perfect, like, whenever I think of like a dark, like academia, like headmaster, like the older brother who's seen a lot and is grizzled, he could have been king, but he's just been beaten down by life. I'm like, it's Ben Barnes. He's gonna turn around in the shadows, and I'm like, I'm casting Ben Barnes.
I mean, if
Yes.
you made teenage Ben Barnes a ginger, he would be a great Prince Kieran in my books. Because he's got
Bam.
that, like, I could have fun, but also life is terrible kind of vibe that Kieran just has going on for 3 books now.
Ooh, and Ben Barnes sings. So if you ever need a moment or a scene where he's like singing in a bar somewhere and you're
There you
supposed to be bad,
go.
he's actually quite good. Ben Barnes sings, guys. The man can do no wrong. Also, he was the Darkling in Shadow and Bone. Wow. Even that character is iconically dark, and we love to see it. We love it. Just the iconic scene where it's like, fine, make me your villain. I'm like, this is great. Speaking of, even though this is a non-spoiler episode, are there any villains in your books? And if so, do you want to give the listeners a bit of a teaser about what to look forward to with the darker elements in your story?
Yeah, so the big bad, that's a lie. He's not really the big bad because he doesn't impact all 9 books, we'll say. The big bad of the first 4.5 books, you meet by name in book 2 and do not actually meet him until book 3.
Oh wow.
But if you ever wanted somebody who had an absolutely valid reason for a crash out, it is our big bad of book 3.
Ooh.
Nobody would, I mean, that's not true. Everybody's different. Perspectives vary. I do not fault him for his evil doings. It seems perfectly justified in my eyes. Be like, yeah, I would be pretty upset too if these set of circumstances befell me. This isn't a good time. So he's not evil
Ooh.
for the sake of evil. He's, in his mind, justifiably bad.
I love a villain who villain who's like, I didn't hurt you, I saved you. It's like, oh, I love that turn where it's like, I'm the hero in this story. It's like, no, you're not. I
Oh,
love
he
it.
is 100% the hero of his own story. I also don't think he would ever say, I didn't hurt you, I saved you. He'd be like, I broke every bone in your body, but it was perfectly valid to do so. As he
You
like
led me to
walks
this.
over you, you're like, just
Oh,
stay down, buddy.
I
Yeah,
love
he's a
this.
fun character. He's very fun to write. Crazy people are always a really good time because you're like, what level of unhinged can I make him before it becomes no longer justifiable?
The limit does not exist. I'm sitting here and I'm like, the limit does not exist.
Said, I'm gonna say it again. I can't tell you his name because if you read the book,
Spoiler.
you'd be like, oh, boom, I know who you're gonna be talking about. But Bad Boy Child, it definitely he is crazier than a bag of cats on fire.
Mm.
But again, nobody would read his backstory and be like, I don't know why he didn't turn out normal.
It was like the perfect. It's the perfect recipe for a bad storm. You know, it's gonna
He
get
is the
bad.
perfect storm tornadoing through the countryside.
Ooh.
And Finn is definitely gonna have a hard time dealing with him.
Okay, I am loving this. All right, as we close out the episode, I wanted to ask one last question. If you could tell listeners anything about book one, just to give them a taste of the story and kind of pull them into the plot, what would you tell them?
Tell them if you are looking for a story that will make you laugh, make you cry, and make you want to go on an adventure, this is definitely the book for you.
Ooh, thank you so much, Brooklyn. You are absolutely amazing. Where can they find your book? Where can they find you?
So books one and two are both available on Amazon, and they are also available pretty much on any online book retailer. You can also order them via the links on my author site, which is brooklynquintana.com. There's also links to all my past podcast appearances that I've done on that website. I am also on Instagram at brooklyn.quintana and TikTok at @TheBrooklynQ.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Brooklyn. You are absolutely amazing. And listeners, please check out her book. It sounds wonderful. Like this video if you can, subscribe on YouTube, and leave a nice little rating on Spotify. And once again, always keep reading. Have a great day.